my mother's 70th birthday dinner with 32 guests raising glasses around the longest table I'd ever seen set in her backyard, my 16-year-old granddaughter pulled my sleeve and whispered, "Grandpa, come outside! Right now! Don't tell anyone where you're going!" I thought she'd spilled something on her dress. Maybe she needed $10 for the tip jar. That's what I thought. I was wrong about everything. Her name is Juniper. June, we call her. She's quiet, the way deep water is quiet, and she'd been standing in the corner of that party for 2 hours, barely touching her food, watching the door every time it opened. I noticed but didn't ask. 16-year-olds have their moods. Her grandmother's birthday wasn't the place to pry. Where are you listening from right now? What time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's with me tonight as I take you back to that backyard in Savannah, Georgia on a Saturday evening in July when the air smelled like gardenias and something was already terribly wrong. My wife Dorothy had spent 3 weeks planning that party. 70 candles, custom tablecloths in her favorite shade of sage green, a caterer who made the shrimp bisque she'd been requesting at every birthday since 1987, her friends from the church choir, her old colleagues from the elementary school where she'd taught 4th grade for 28 years, the neighbors who'd watched us plant that magnolia in the front yard back when Ronald Reagan was still president. The whole backyard glowed under string lights. Dorothy laughed from her chair at the head of the table, and she looked, honestly, like she had never aged a day past 40. Our daughter Savannah stood near the dessert table, smiling with her husband Todd. They'd driven down from Atlanta for the weekend. Nice of them. Or so I believed. June led me past the garden gate, around the side of the house, out of earshot. She stopped beside my truck and turned to face me. Her hands were shaking. "Grandpa, I need you to listen to me and not freak out." "You're already freaking me out." "I know. I'm sorry." She pulled out her phone. "Last night when we got here, I went upstairs to put my bag in the guest room. Mom and Dad were in the hallway outside Grandma's bedroom. They didn't hear me on the stairs. The door to the linen closet was open and I stayed there. I shouldn't have. But I heard them and Grandpa what they said." Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together. She's 16 years old, and she looked in that moment like someone carrying something no teenager should ever have to carry. "Show me," I said. She pressed play. The audio was muffled, like her phone had been resting against fabric, but the voices were clear enough. Serena first, then Todd, then Serena again. She signed the trust amendment Tuesday. Didn't even ask what it said. I told her it was the updated insurance beneficiary form from the financial planner. Todd's voice lower. "What about the Maplewood account? The CD?" "Jointly held with Dad, which is the problem. But the amendment supersedes." Marcy confirmed it. "Once the trust is amended, the distribution goes through us." "And him?" A pause. "He'll understand eventually. He always does." "The Pemberton Roadhouse." Serena listed quietly. "Doug's running comparables now. Probably 480, maybe 500. We close on the lake house in September. Between both properties and the inheritance from Aunt Clara, we're looking at just over 900,000. I stood by my truck in the July heat and I couldn't move. My fingers had gone cold. Through the fence, I could hear the jazz trio Dot had hired playing something soft and sweet, and I could hear her laughing again, that big laugh she has that fills the room. $900,000. My wife's house. My wife's inheritance from her sister who died 8 months ago. The house on Pemberton Road that Dorothy had grown up in, that her parents had left her, that she'd said she would never sell because her mother's rose bushes were still in the side yard and she wanted to be buried somewhere near them someday. Already listed. Already sold, near enough. There's more, June said quietly. She scrolled to a second clip. Same night, she told me. Same hallway. An hour later. Todd's voice. What about the cognitive thing? Is Hendrik still on board? Serena. He's coming Sunday brunch. Says he can do an informal evaluation. We document behavioral concerns over the next few weeks, get the formal assessment in September, file for guardianship by October. She'll be at Briarwood by Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving. Serena, it's a good facility. She'll be fine. She won't even know. The recording cut off. I must have made some sound because June reached out and put her hand on my arm. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to ruin the party. But I couldn't not tell you. Briarwood. I knew Briarwood. It was a memory care facility on the east side of Savannah. $8,500 a month. I knew this because our neighbor Edna had gone there 2 years ago after her stroke, and her son had mentioned the cost once, with an expression I now understood differently. My daughter was planning to have my wife declared cognitively impaired, strip her of her assets, and put her in memory care by Thanksgiving. Dorothy, who read 2 books a week. Dorothy, who could tell you the name of every student she'd ever taught and what they'd gone on to do with their lives. Dorothy, who had planned this party to the last sprig of rosemary on the appetizer tray. Dr. Hendricks, I knew that name too. Family practice over on Waters Avenue. We'd switched to him 3 years ago when our old doctor retired. I had never once suspected the man. June was watching my face. What do we do? I looked back at the party through the fence slats. Serena was refilling wine glasses and laughing at something one of Dorothy's choir friends had said. Todd stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder, the picture of the devoted son-in-law. They had been planning this since at least last night, maybe longer. The trust amendment had been signed Tuesday. This had been in motion for weeks. You did the right thing, I said. My voice sounded far away even to me. June, whatever happens tonight, you did the right thing. Telling me. They're my parents. Her voice broke on the last word. I know. I love them. I know that too. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and lifted her chin. Something in that gesture, that small act of steadying herself, it nearly undid me entirely. I dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm. She asked me to repeat the details twice. I did. She told me to stay on the line, told me officers would arrive within 20 minutes, told me not to confront anyone directly. 20 minutes. Dorothy was cutting her birthday cake in 20 minutes. The caterer had a whole presentation ready. Sparklers and the choir ladies were going to sing. I told the dispatcher I had to go back inside. She said, "Sir, please." I said, "I'm not leaving my wife with them." I hung up. I looked at June. "Can you do something hard?" She nodded without hesitation. "Go back in there. Stay near Grandma. If anyone offers her anything to drink that she didn't pour herself, you accidentally knock it over. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Don't let them see you watching. You're just a teenager at your grandma's birthday party." She squared her shoulders and walked back through the gate. I stood there for 10 seconds, breathing, then followed her. Walking back into that party felt like stepping onto a stage where I suddenly knew everyone's lines but mine. Dorothy sat surrounded by women who'd known her for 40 years. Serena moved through the guests like a gracious hostess, touching arms, laughing, playing the devoted daughter so completely I almost doubted what I'd heard. Almost. Todd caught my eye across the yard and gave me a small nod. I nodded back. "Dad." Serena appeared at my elbow. "Everything okay? We couldn't find you." "Just needed some air." He'd got to me for a minute. She studied my face. "You sure? You look pale." "I'm fine. It's a wonderful party. Your mother's having the time of her life." Whatever she was looking for in my expression, she didn't find it. She smiled and moved on. I positioned myself near Dorothy and stayed there. June circulated nearby, casual, unhurried, playing her part better than any adult I knew. Twice I saw Todd glance at her. Twice she didn't notice or pretended not to. At 8:15, a man I recognized as Dr. Hendricks arrived at the garden gate. He was carrying a bottle of wine as a gift, wearing a short-sleeved button-down, looking like any other guest who'd arrived fashionably late. He made his way toward Dorothy with the easy confidence of a man who'd done this before. He'd done this before. That thought landed in my chest like something heavy. I reached Dorothy first. "Sweetheart," I said, taking her hand, "could I steal you for just a second? There's something I want to show you in the garden. The moonflowers are open." She looked up, surprised but delighted. "Right now." "Right now." We slipped away toward the back corner of the yard where the moonflowers climbed the trellis, and I kept my voice very low. Dot, I need to tell you something. I need you to hear me. The way she looked at me then, 70 years old and still the sharpest reader of a room I have ever known. What happened? Not a question. She already felt it. I told her everything. The recording, the trust amendment, Pemberton Road, Briarwood by Thanksgiving, Hendricks standing 40 feet away with a bottle of Chardonnay and paperwork in his head. She was quiet for a very long time. The moonflowers were open, white as paper in the dark. The form I signed Tuesday, she said finally. Marcy Dolliver brought it to the house. Said it was the beneficiary update for the investment account. I asked Serena about it and she said it was routine. I signed it. A pause. I didn't read it. I know. Pemberton Road. Her voice went quiet in a way I hadn't heard since her mother died. My mother's house. We're going to fix it. She sold my mother's house. She listed it. There's a difference. It hasn't closed. We can stop it. Dorothy turned to look across the yard at our daughter. Serena was talking to Dr. Hendricks now, and even from here I could see them both laughing, leaning close, making a plan. Something crossed Dorothy's face that I had only seen a handful of times in 43 years of marriage. Not grief, not even anger, something harder than both. The police are coming, I said. Good, she said. I had called the non-emergency line earlier. What I should have done was dial the Adult Protective Services hotline, which I did not know at the time existed for exactly this kind of case. A plainclothes officer named Taggart had arrived earlier, posing as a late guest, and I spotted him near the drink table when we came back from the garden. I gave Officer Taggart a small nod. He returned it. Serena found us near the trellis. There you two are. Cake's coming out in 5 minutes. She looked between us. What's wrong? Why do you both look like that? Like what? Dorothy asked pleasantly. Like something happened. Something always happens at a party, sweetheart. That's what parties are for. Serena's eyes narrowed slightly, but she led us back toward the table. The cake came out. The choir ladies sang. Dorothy blew out the candles while 32 people cheered, and I stood beside her with her hand in mine and watched my daughter smile and clap and film it on her phone, and I thought about what it costs a person to become someone who does a thing like this. Then June's voice from behind Serena. Oh, I'm so sorry. The sound of glass hitting the patio. Serena's white linen blazer soaked with red wine. June, Todd snapped. I'm so sorry. It slipped. I'll get napkins. June was already moving, face flushed, playing the clumsy teenager perfectly. What she'd knocked over, I realized, was the glass of sparkling water that Todd had poured and set beside Dorothy's plate. Not Dorothy's original glass. A new one. Dorothy hadn't touched it. She hadn't even noticed it was there. I looked at June. She looked back at me. The communication lasted less than a second. Officer Taggart appeared from the drink table. His partner emerged from near the garden gate. 2 more officers in plain clothes stepped in from the side yard. Todd Pemberton, Serena Pemberton. Todd turned. His face went through 6 different expressions in about 2 seconds and landed on something that was almost, but not quite, calm. What is this? Savannah Police Department, Elder Fraud Unit. We need you both to come with us. Serena looked at Dorothy. Mom, this is a misunderstanding. Dr. Hendricks. Officer Taggart turned. Hendricks had gone completely still. We'll need to speak with you as well. I'm just a guest. You drove 40 minutes to attend the birthday party of a patient you have not treated in 8 months, carrying paperwork in your jacket pocket. We'd like to discuss that. Taggart's voice was very even. Now. Serena made one more attempt. She turned to Dorothy and her voice shifted into something that sounded almost genuine. Mom, please, everything we did, we were trying to protect you. You and Dad aren't getting any younger and the finances are complicated and we were scared. Dorothy looked at her daughter for a long moment. You listed my mother's house, she said. You forged documents in my name. You brought a doctor to my birthday party to have me declared incompetent. She paused. And you were scared. Serena opened her mouth. Dorothy turned away. They arrested Todd first. He went quietly, head down, not looking at anyone. Serena screamed that there had been a misunderstanding, that we would regret this, that June had recorded a private conversation illegally. She was still talking when the officers walked her through the garden gate. Hendricks went last. He asked if he could call his attorney. They told him he could do that at the station. June stood in the middle of the patio, arms wrapped around herself, watching her parents' car pull away. 32 people stood in absolute silence around my wife's birthday table, the cake still half cut, the candles burned to stubs. I put my arm around June. She leaned into my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, when she still called me Poppy instead of Grandpa because she couldn't get the R right. You okay? I asked. No, she said honestly. Me neither. Dorothy reached around me and took June's hand. The three of us stood there in the string lights while the choir ladies quietly gathered purses and the caterer began, with extraordinarily professional tact, to wrap up the leftover shrimp bisque. The investigation that followed lasted 4 months. What the Elder Fraud Unit found went beyond our family. Marcy Tolliver, the so-called financial planner Serena had used to execute the trust amendment, had run the same scheme for at least 6 other families in the greater Savannah area. She had a network, a notary who didn't ask questions, a trust attorney who charged a flat fee for expedited amendments, and Dr. Hendricks, who had filed fraudulent cognitive assessments for at least 9 patients over 3 years. 9 families. None of them had any idea. The detective assigned to our case, a woman named Osei, laid the files out on our kitchen table one evening in August. She was methodical, specific, and spoke to Dorothy and me like we were capable of handling the truth, which we appreciated. Your trust amendment has been nullified, she said. The power of attorney your daughter filed hasn't been executed. You still have full control of all accounts. And Pemberton Road? Dorothy asked. The listing has been withdrawn. No sale occurred. Dorothy closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she said, And the others? The other families? Osei's expression shifted, just slightly. 4 of the 6 cases are under active review. We have sufficient cause to challenge the guardianships. 2 are more complex. She paused. It will take time. We'd like to help, I said. With? Whatever families need. Advocacy. Testimony. My wife is a teacher. She knows how to explain things to people who are frightened and confused. Osei looked at Dorothy. You're not frightened? Dorothy considered this. I'm furious, she said. That's different. The trial was set for the following spring. All 4 defendants, Serena, Todd, Hendricks, and Tolliver, were charged with elder financial exploitation, fraud, and conspiracy. In Georgia, elder financial exploitation of someone 65 or older is a felony. The charges carried sentences of up to 20 years. Serena hired a private defense attorney who argued that she had genuinely believed her mother needed more care than she was getting, that the trust amendment was a reasonable protective measure, that she'd only had her mother's best interests at heart. The recording on June's phone made that argument very difficult to sustain. Between both properties and the inheritance from Aunt Clara, we're looking at just over $900,000. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Todd received 11 years and would be eligible for parole after 7. Marcy Tolliver, who cooperated with prosecutors and provided detailed records of her other clients, received 6 years and restitution requirements that would take her the rest of her working life to satisfy. Dr. Hendricks lost his license the week before sentencing and received 8 years. He would be 69 when he was released. Serena received 14 years, eligible for parole after 9. When the judge read the sentence, Serena looked across the courtroom at Dorothy. Dorothy didn't look away. June stood between us in the gallery, her hand in mine, her other hand in Dorothy's. She hadn't opened any of the letters her mother sent from County Holding. They sat in a shoebox in her closet. She told me once that she didn't know if she'd ever read them. You don't have to decide that now, I said. I know, she said. I just want to know that it's okay if I never do. It's okay, I said. Whatever you decide is okay. She's 17 now. She sees a counselor every other week. A woman she says is very practical and doesn't make her talk about things before she's ready. She comes to Savannah most weekends. She's sleeping in the guest room that used to be her mother's childhood room, and she has covered one wall with photographs and postcards and a map of every national park she wants to visit before she turns 25. She told Dorothy recently that she wants to study law, elder law specifically. Because of what happened to you, she said. Dorothy shook her head. Because of what you did, she said. There's a difference. In the months after the sentencing, Dorothy and I helped 3 families through the process of challenging fraudulent guardianships linked to Tolliver's network. 2 of those people, a retired postal worker named Bernard and a former librarian named Claudette, had been living in managed care facilities while their children collected their Social Security and managed their accounts from across the state. Neither of them belonged there. Watching Bernard walk out of Magnolia Place assisted living on a Tuesday morning in February, carrying one bag and wearing a tie because he'd wanted to look decent for the occasion, is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He told me on the drive to his cousin's house, where he was going to stay when his apartment situation was sorted out, that he had stopped believing anyone was coming. I gave up, he said, matter-of-factly. The way you say something you're not proud of, but have made peace with. 6 months in, I thought, that's just what happened to me. My son did this, and nobody was going to fix it. He looked out the window at the February road. Then your wife called. Dorothy had called. She'd tracked down his case through the public court records and called the facility directly and asked to speak with him. And the front desk had put her through because she'd said she was a former colleague and her voice carries authority the way only decades of teaching 4th grade can give you. She'd told him someone was coming. She'd told him it would take a few months, but someone was coming. He'd held on to that. The Pemberton Roadhouse still stands. Dorothy's mother's rose bushes came back this spring, the way they always do, leggy and red and entirely unbothered by anything that happened the previous year. Dorothy drags over every Sunday to check on them. She never talks about selling. I think sometimes about the version of that birthday night where June doesn't come to me, where she hears those voices in the hallway and decides it's too complicated, that she loves her parents, that she's only 16 and this isn't her problem to solve. That version exists. It nearly happened. In that version, by Thanksgiving, Dorothy is at Briarwood. The house is sold. I am trying to understand documents I've never seen and agreements I was never party to. And some trust attorney is explaining to me very patiently that my wife signed this of her own free will, and there is nothing I can do. That version nearly happened. Instead, my granddaughter stood in a garden in July with shaking hands and said, "Grandpa, come outside. Right now." I say this to anyone listening, anyone who has a parent getting older or a spouse who trusts too easily, or a family member who has started asking a few too many questions about what things are worth. Things are worth. Pay attention to the people around you who love without agenda. They are often younger than you expect. They are often quieter than you notice. And sometimes, when something is very wrong, they are the only ones in the room who will tell you. June saved my wife's life, not from illness or accident, but from the kind of erasure that happens slowly, legally, in documents you didn't read, and facilities with nice names and children who convinced themselves they had a reason. She was 16 years old and she pressed record. That's the whole story. That's all of it. And I'm only telling you because it almost wasn't a story anyone got to tell. I keep coming back to the rose bushes on Pemberton Road. Dorothy's mother planted them in 1962. They came back this spring the same way they always do, unbothered, unhurried, completely indifferent to everything that tried to uproot them the previous year. I think that's the closest thing to a life lesson I found in all of this. Not a tidy one. Not the kind you'd put on a greeting card. Just the plain fact that some things, if they're rooted deep enough, survive what tries to destroy them. What Serena and Todd didn't happen overnight. That's the part I've had the most time to sit with. It started small. A question here about finances, a comment there about whether Dorothy seemed tired lately, an offer to help manage things that felt generous at the time. Greed rarely announces itself. It borrows the language of concern and shows up looking like family. What I've learned the hard way and too late to have seen it coming is that love and money in the same sentence should always make you pay closer attention, not with suspicion, with clarity. There's a difference. June understood something I didn't, and she's 17. She understood that knowing the right thing and doing the right thing are not the same act. Plenty of people hear something they shouldn't and decide it's too complicated, that they love the people involved, that someone older will handle it. June didn't decide that. She stood in a hallway with her phone shaking in her hand and she pressed record. And then she came to find me. And that single choice is the reason Dorothy still drives to Pemberton Road on Sundays to check on her mother's roses. That kind of courage isn't loud. It doesn't feel heroic from the inside. June told me she spent all night after she recorded them just sitting on the guest bed staring at her phone, wondering if she was wrong, wondering if she'd misunderstood, wondering what would happen to her family if she said something. She said the worst part wasn't telling me. The worst part was the moment before, when she could still have chosen not to. She chose anyway. That's what I want people to take from this story. Not the arrests, not the sentencing, not the network of fraud that unraveled afterward. Though all of that matters, what I want people to carry with them is the image of a 16-year-old girl standing in a backyard in July, hands shaking, telling the truth when the truth was going to cost her something real. What saved Dorothy wasn't luck. It was a person who had enough decency to recognize that protecting someone she loved was worth more than protecting her own comfort. It was a person who was sharp enough to understand what she'd heard and careful enough to document it. And it was a person who, when the moment came, didn't flinch. Those three things together, the conscience, the mind, the spine to act, that's what changed the outcome. Take away any one of them, and this story ends differently. I think about Bernard, who stopped believing anyone was coming. I think about Claudette, who spent 14 months in a facility 12 miles from the house she owned outright. They didn't have a June, and that's not a comfort. That's an obligation. If you're reading this and you have a parent getting older, or a spouse who trusts easily, or an elderly neighbor whose kids you've never met, pay attention. Ask questions. Be the person who shows up before someone has to beg you to. The roots that hold are the ones that were tended before the storm. Dorothy knew that. Her mother knew it before her. This spring, the roses came back redder than ever.